There's a modern lie that's silently destroying men. Show your vulnerability to everyone. It sounds nice, it sounds evolved, but politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches something very different. The world doesn't reward uncontrolled emotional display, it tests limits. And Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Better to be feared than loved, but always avoid being hated. It's not about brutality, it's about control. Because when you show weakness at the wrong moment, you don't gain empathy, you lose position. Decisions based on real human nature show that people respect stability, not impulsive public confession. And here's the uncomfortable point. Fear isn't the problem. The problem is allowing fear to be seen as strategic vulnerability. Perhaps you are going through a crisis right now. Perhaps you are afraid of losing status, money, relationships, reputation. And the urge to explain, justify, vent is enormous. But the end justifies the means when the means is to preserve your reconstruction. The appearance of virtue is not hypocrisy. It is applied emotional intelligence. Virtue and fortune favor those who maintain composure when everything trembles inside. The calculated use of force begins with controlling one's own expression, because loyal and dedicated armies follow those who appear solid, even under pressure. Constant adaptability is what separates ordinary men from strategic men. In this video, you'll understand why never showing weakness, even when you're afraid, can be the most powerful decision of your life. Not to turn to stone, not to deny emotions, but to weather the storm without becoming prey. And when you understand how to apply this in practice, you'll realize that perhaps your crisis isn't the end. It's the beginning of your silent ascension. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He knew this was the ultimate test. It wasn't just an isolated loss. It was a coordinated collapse of his entire life. Home, wife, job, everything disappearing at once, as if the universe had decided to conduct a brutal audit of his existence. And here's something Machiavelli already understood with disconcerting clarity. Life doesn't operate on sentimentality. It operates on politics guided by reality, not ideals. Modern man believes that by being good, the world will be good to him. But real human nature doesn't work that way. Decisions based on real human nature show that crises don't test character, they expose structure. And when everything collapses at once, what remains isn't discourse, it's posture. Many despair, beg for understanding, seek public consolation. But, as the cold principle of strategy states, it's better to be feared than loved, but always avoid being hated. In moments like this, the collapse isn't just financial or emotional, it's reputational. How he reacts defines whether he will be seen as a fallen leader or as open prey, and it is at this point that virtù and fortuna begin to separate. Because you see, losing everything at once isn't just pain, it's exposure. It's when former colleagues start silently observing, when acquaintances begin to gauge your energy, when even family members question your abilities. Most don't realize it, but crisis is a stage, and a stage demands control. Does the end justify the means? It depends on the strategy adopted. If he decides to collapse publicly, over-explain, over-justify, he gives ammunition. If he understands the calculated use of force, he starts to act differently. It's not cheap pretense. It's the appearance of virtue applied intelligently. He doesn't need to lie. He needs to control the narrative. Because in the social game, one's own loyal armies are built from the perception of stability. A man in crisis can rebuild his assets, but if he loses respect, the reconstruction doubles in difficulty. And the issue isn't the absence of pain. It's the management of pain. The harsh truth is that few are prepared for a scenario of total crisis. Most were raised to seek validation, not power. And when the structure collapses, they try to salvage their image with public emotional confessions. But the world doesn't operate on structural compassion. It operates on the perception of weakness. Constant adaptability is what separates those who are reborn from those who sink. He needs to understand that this moment isn't about suffering, it's about positioning himself. Because if the crisis is inevitable, how he presents himself in it is a choice. And when he begins to realize that the game isn't internal but external as well, something changes. He understands that there's a premise that few have the courage to accept, and it's precisely this premise that we're going to address now. There's a premise that almost no one teaches, but that Machiavelli would understand immediately. Whoever shows pain without strategy becomes a target. It may sound harsh, almost cruel, but this is politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The world doesn't function like a therapy group. It functions as an environment of constant signal reading. When a man exposes his vulnerability uncontrollably, he doesn't receive compassion. He receives measurement. They measure his stability. They measure his usefulness. They measure his risk, and often they begin to treat him as disposable. Better to be feared than loved has never meant gratuitous brutality, but rather maintaining structural respect. Because in real human nature, public weakness becomes silent permission for disrespect. Decisions based on real human nature show that people test limits when they perceive cracks. It's not malice, it's social instinct. And whoever ignores this pays dearly. He doesn't need to turn to stone. He doesn't need to become an emotional robot, but he needs to understand the calculated use of force, including emotional force. Showing everything to everyone is strategic naivete. Imagine a businessman who loses a major contract and on the same day posts a long rant on social media about how devastated he is. What happens? Future clients begin to doubt the company's stability. Employees feel insecure. Suppliers tighten deadlines. The end justifies the means when the objective is to preserve position. An appearance of virtue is not falsehood, it's reputational intelligence. He may feel fear, of course he may, but he chooses where, with whom, and how to express it. His own loyal armies are not formed by a casual audience. They are formed by strategic allies. Vulnerability should be shared with a few, not distributed like an emotional pamphlet. Because here's the painful point. The world isn't made up of neutral spectators. It's made up of predators and competitors. And in times of crisis, social reading intensifies. Constant adaptability demands that he understand that visible emotional control is symbolic capital. He may be afraid, but his public expression communicates stability. He may be insecure, but his posture conveys direction. And this isn't empty theatrics, it's raw leadership. The issue isn't denying the pain. It's preventing the pain from dictating his image, and when he begins to accept this premise, he realizes that it's not enough to simply hide weakness. He needs to build something active in its place. And that's where a concept emerges that few know, but which completely changes the game. He begins to realize that simply resisting in silence is not enough. Brute resistance does not build power. This is where the concept of the sovereign mask emerges. And before anyone confuses it with falsehood, it's necessary to understand. Machiavelli never taught vulgar hypocrisy, he taught strategy. Politics, guided by reality, not by ideals, demands mastery of perception. The sovereign mask is not about denying who he is, it's about protecting who he is while weathering the storm. Virtù and fortuna always dance together, but only those who maintain their composure survive when fortune turns its back. The crisis cannot see despair etched on his face. Because, as we already know, it's better to be feared than loved, but always avoid being hated. The mask is not arrogance, it's balance. It prevents adversaries from detecting structural weaknesses, and at the same time, it prevents allies from panicking. It's control of the emotional field. The sovereign mask operates on 4 silent rules. These are not rules written in stone, but practical principles of strategic survival. It understands that the calculated use of force begins with controlling one's own expression. Decisions based on real human nature show that people believe more in what they see than in what they hear. If he appears stable, he is treated as stable. If he appears broken, he will be treated as broken. The end justifies the means when the means is to preserve future power. Imagine a commander who, in the midst of battle, displays visible panic. What happens to his own loyal armies? They hesitate. And hesitation in war costs territory. In real life, it is no different. Family, team, partners all observe micro-expressions. The mask protects the psychological field. But be warned, the sovereign mask is not permanent. It is a tool for transition. Constant adaptability means knowing when to use it and when to remove it. He doesn't repress emotions forever, he manages timing. He doesn't become cold, he becomes strategic. Because the difference between weakness and humanity lies in public dosage. The appearance of virtue is an ancient art. The leader who survives is not the one who never suffers, but the one who never allows suffering to define his public image. And when he understands this, he realizes that he needs to apply the 4 rules concretely. Theory is not enough, it's daily practice. And the first rule begins with something most people can't stand to do: absolute silence. The first rule of the sovereign mask is simple to understand and difficult to execute: information blackout. When a crisis hits, the immediate urge is to explain, to justify, to post, to vent, to seek an emotional audience. But Machiavelli would never recommend unnecessary exposure. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that information is power, and whoever distributes power loses an advantage. A man in crisis cannot become a walking bulletin board of his own downfall. Decisions based on real human nature show that every detail disclosed will be interpreted, distorted, or used. The end justifies the means when the objective is to preserve strategic positioning. It's not about lying, it's about not feeding the curiosity of others. This is where the calculated use of force comes in, including the force of silence. Silence is not weakness. Silence is control. Imagine someone who lost their job and immediately posts a series of stories explaining what happened, criticizing the company, and reporting injustices. It might ease the heart for a few hours. But externally, former colleagues distance themselves. Recruiters become wary. The market observes emotional instability. Better to be feared than loved has never meant being cruel, but it does mean not becoming predictable. The information blackout cuts off the fuel for speculation. It simply disappears from the emotional radar. It doesn't respond to provocations. It doesn't comment on behind-the-scenes events. It doesn't seek public validation. The appearance of virtue here is silent maturity. Your own loyal armies don't need to know everything. They need to feel secure. Constant adaptability requires understanding that premature exposure weakens future negotiations. And there's something even more strategic about this. When he doesn't provide a narrative, others fill it in with assumptions, and assumptions generally favor those who maintain a firm stance. The void creates mystery, and mystery creates cautious respect. Virtue and fortuna play in favor of those who control timing. He may be restructuring his entire life, but outwardly he appears stable, centered, busy. This initial control is the basis for the next rules, because silence prepares the ground. But silence by itself is not enough. At some point, blows will continue to come, and that's where the second rule comes in, the one that separates reactive men from strategic men. After the information blackout, something even more disconcerting comes to the forefront for the observer: tactical indifference. He may have suffered real losses, harsh criticism, even veiled humiliations, but publicly, nothing. No uncontrolled reaction. Machiavelli would understand this as psychological field dominance. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, shows that those who react impulsively hand over their inner map to the adversary. When someone provokes and receives an intense reaction, they discover where it hurts. Decisions based on real human nature reveal that provocation is a test, and those who pass the test don't react, he observes. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean intimidating with shouts, but intimidating with self-control. Because the absence of reaction generates discomfort in the other. He doesn't know if he was right. He doesn't know if he shook things up. He becomes insecure. Imagine a common scenario. Someone makes a scathing comment about your recent dismissal in public. Most people defend themselves immediately, explain the context, and rebut. Not him. He listens, maintains a relaxed posture, responds with something neutral, or even changes the subject. Calculated use of force here is emotional economy. The end justifies the means when the means is to preserve strategic superiority. The appearance of virtue is apparent serenity. This is not weakness, it is energy control. Your own loyal armies observe this and feel stability. Adversaries feel frustration because they expected an explosion, they received emptiness. Constant adaptability requires understanding that public emotion is a limited resource and must be invested intelligently. There's something powerful about well-executed indifference. It creates doubt, and doubt weakens attacks. Virtue and fortuna favor those who maintain composure under pressure. He doesn't need to prove anything at that moment. He knows that reconstruction is a silent process. Tactical indifference is not insensitivity, it's strategic discipline. He feels it, of course he feels it, but he doesn't put on a show. And when the opponent realizes he can't elicit a reaction, he begins to retreat. But there's a next level here, because in addition to not reacting, there's something even more disorienting for the observer, disappearing from the visible effort, and that's exactly what the third rule will explore. After silence and indifference comes something few can sustain: selective emptiness. It not only stops reacting, it stops showing effort. It doesn't publish reconstruction plans. It doesn't announce plans. It doesn't share goals. It disappears from the visible narrative. Machiavelli would call this absolute control of strategic information. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that those who reveal movement become targets of sabotage. Decisions based on real human nature show that people compete even when they say they support each other. The end justifies the means when the goal is to rebuild on safe ground. Better to be feared than loved, but always avoid being hated, and nothing generates more caution than someone unpredictable. Selective emptiness creates unpredictability. And unpredictability generates cautious respect. Imagine someone who lost everything and weeks later discreetly reappears with a new structured project. No teaser, no dramatic announcement, no grand promise, just results. Calculated use of force is this: acting invisibly and appearing at the exact moment. The appearance of virtue here is normalcy. He seems calm, busy, almost boring. But behind the scenes, he works as a strategist. His own loyal armies don't need daily updates. They need consistent leadership. Constant adaptability means knowing that premature exposure weakens future impact. He understands that reconstruction is a silent work. While others talk, he executes. While others explain, he prepares. And the psychological effect of this is powerful, because the opponent begins to wonder, what is he doing? The absence of signals becomes strategic tension. Virtù and Fortuna favor those who master timing. He doesn't seek validation. He doesn't seek applause. He doesn't seek public emotional closure. He understands that true power is not announced. It is revealed. Selective emptiness is not social isolation. It is strategic retreat. And when he finally returns with visible stability, the impact is multiplied. But there is still a final movement, even more subtle and more disturbing for the observer. Because beyond silence, indifference, and mystery, there is something that dismantles any predictable interpretation. After silence, indifference, and strategic emptiness, the final move emerges: the smiling executor. Here's the point few understand. It's not enough to appear stable. You need to appear serene, even cordial, precisely at the worst moment. Machiavelli deeply understood the appearance of virtue as an instrument of power. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the right smile at the right moment is a psychological weapon. Decisions based on real human nature reveal that adversaries expect tension, irritation, resentment. When they encounter calm and politeness, they are disarmed. Better to be feared than loved is not about being aggressive, it's about being impenetrable. And nothing is more impenetrable than someone who navigates chaos with controlled lightness. The end justifies the means when the means is to confuse external perception. The smile here is not naivete, it's strategy. Imagine a simple scenario. Months later, he encounters someone who silently celebrated his downfall. Instead of avoiding him, he greets them naturally, asks about their family, and maintains a balanced tone. This is the calculated use of force, acting with strategic cordiality. His own loyal armies observe this and sense maturity. Adversaries are disconcerted because they expected resentment. They receive stability. Constant adaptability means understanding that visible emotional energy shapes reputation. Virtù and Fortuna favor those who maintain narrative control down to the smallest details. He doesn't use irony. He doesn't provoke. He doesn't try to show superiority. He simply executes his reconstruction in silence and maintains an elevated posture. This creates a strange feeling in the other person. Perhaps he was never as weak as he seemed. And here is the real effect of the smiling executor. He redefines the perception of the crisis. The public begins to reinterpret events. Maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe he's already better than we thought. The narrative changes without a single public explanation. A well-applied appearance of virtue builds a solid reputation. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that perception is social currency. He may still be rearranging things internally, but externally he conveys stability. And when that image begins to solidify, something becomes clear. Image control is not vanity. It is real power. And that is exactly what we need to talk about now. He finally understands something most only learn after losing a lot. Image is not superficiality, it's a power structure. Machiavelli never separated reputation from authority. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, makes it clear that public perception shapes opportunities. It's not just who he is internally that matters, but how he is interpreted externally. Decisions based on real human nature show that people don't react to essence, they react to the reading of essence. Better to be feared than loved, but always avoid being hated. This is a principle of image, not brutality. The end justifies the means when the means is to protect symbolic capital. Because symbolic capital opens doors, attracts alliances, and wards off predators. Those who neglect this live at the mercy of others' opinions. Those who control this begin to run the game. Think of business leaders who have weathered financial crises. Many were internally pressured, but externally conveyed clear direction. Calculated use of force includes control of speech, posture, even body language. Your own loyal armies don't follow someone who seems lost. Constant adaptability requires adjusting communication according to the scenario. He learns to select words, reduce emotional exposure, avoid reactivity. Virtù and fortuna favor those who understand that narrative precedes reality. Reconstruction may be underway, but the image of reconstruction needs to be solid. The appearance of virtue here is not empty theatrics, it's strategic coherence. He doesn't need to lie about difficulties. He needs to choose how to present them. Because the world doesn't invest in those who seem unstable. And there's something even deeper. When he controls his image, he reduces attacks. Adversaries attack weak targets. When they encounter a firm stance, they retreat or recalculate. Politics, guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that power is often the perception of power. Decisions based on real human nature show that even trust can be built externally before it is felt internally. And here begins an uncomfortable question. Why do so many men sabotage this advantage by seeking public emotional validation? Why do they insist on venting, justifying, asking for recognition? That's what we need to talk about now. There's a modern habit that erodes authority without the person realizing it, the obsession with validation and public emotional closure. They want closure. They want to explain their version. They want everyone to understand their pain. But Machiavelli would never advise this gratuitous exposure. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the world rarely grants collective emotional justice. Decisions based on real human nature reveal something uncomfortable. Those who constantly seek validation demonstrate a dependence on approval, and dependence reduces power. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean rejecting affection, but it means not depending on it to exist socially. The end justifies the means when the means is to protect emotional sovereignty. Because those who need everyone to understand their story relinquish control of their own narrative. Imagine someone who ends a relationship and writes lengthy posts explaining what happened, trying to prove they were wronged. They might even get some supportive comments, but they also gain a label of instability. Calculated use of emotional strength means choosing where to process pain. Therapy, mentoring, private conversations with strategic allies, these strengthen. Impulsive public posts weaken. Your own loyal armies don't need drama, they need direction. Constant adaptability requires abandoning the need for emotional applause. Virtù and fortuna favor those who maintain composure even when they have legitimate arguments to complain about. The appearance of virtue here is silent dignity. He understands that not all truth needs to be proclaimed. Some only need to be overcome. And there's something even more subtle. Seeking external closure creates an illusion of progress. He feels momentary relief, but doesn't advance structurally. Politics, guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that maturity isn't about convincing the world. It's about moving forward despite it. Decisions based on real human nature show that respect is born from posture, not justification. When he abandons the need for everyone to understand him, something changes internally. He regains autonomy. He stops negotiating his image emotionally. And it is at this moment that he begins to realize that there is a next level of power, reserved for a few, accessible only to those who accept psychological discipline. And perhaps it's time to open that door. After understanding silence, indifference, strategic emptiness, and image control, he realizes something inevitable. Few men can withstand this level of discipline. Most prefer immediate relief to structural power. Machiavelli already showed that politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires constant preparation. It's not internet theory, it's the practice of social positioning. Decisions based on real human nature are not taught in traditional schools. It's better to be feared than loved, but always avoiding being hated requires strategic emotional intelligence. The end justifies the means when the means is the construction of personal sovereignty. And sovereignty doesn't arise by chance. It's built in selective circles. Your own loyal armies don't emerge spontaneously. They are formed by alignment of mindset. Constant adaptability requires proximity to those who think strategically. That's why there's a deeper level of learning, a space where we don't just discuss theory, but real-world application, where we talk about the calculated use of social force, reading micro-behaviors, and strategic positioning in competitive environments. Virtù and fortuna favor those who anticipate. The appearance of virtue is not improvisation, it's technique. And technique requires training. The man who wants to navigate crises without becoming prey needs to master not only visible behavior, but also the internal architecture of power. He needs to learn how to structure narratives, negotiate image, identify social predators, and build solid alliances. This type of content is not for fleeting, curious onlookers. It's for those who accept responsibility for their own image. Because ultimately, he understands that power isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about controlling the environment without being noticed. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, is uncomfortable but liberating. Decisions based on real human nature require maturity. Better to be feared than loved isn't about physical fear. It's about structural respect. And those who want to deepen this mentality need to be among men who don't romanticize weakness. There's a circle where these principles are explored in depth, where social strategy is studied as a practical science. A circle reserved for those who have decided they will no longer be victims of misinterpretation. And perhaps that's the next decision he needs to make. There is a stark difference between surviving a crisis and emerging from it more powerful. Most survive, few become strategists. Machiavelli never promised comfort. He taught politics guided by reality, not ideals. And reality is simple. The world observes more than it listens. Decisions based on real human nature require you to control your image, posture, and reaction, even when fear tries to take over. Better to be feared than loved, but always avoid being hated. It's about strategic balance. It's not about hardening your heart. It's about shielding your position. The end justifies the means when the means is preserving your emotional and social sovereignty. Virtù and fortuna do not favor those who collapse in public. They favor those who reorganize in silence. Calculated use of force is not violence. It is self-control. Your own loyal armies do not follow whoever shouts the loudest. They follow whoever maintains direction. Constant adaptability is the invisible weapon that sustains long-term respect. Now I ask you, are you reacting, or are you strategically navigating your crisis? Are you seeking validation or building power? Do you want to be understood by everyone or respected by those who matter? Because the difference between victim and strategist isn't in the pain you feel, It's in the stance you choose. And perhaps today is the day to decide that you will never again be seen as prey. Perhaps it's the day to understand that visible emotional control is social capital. Perhaps it's time to stop over-explaining and start positioning yourself better. If this content has opened your eyes, then don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because here, you don't learn pretty phrases, you learn applicable strategy. Every week you'll delve deeper into psychological power, social positioning, and silent leadership. And if you really want to move beyond naivete and into the game of reality, then stick around. The next lesson could be the one that completely changes how the world sees you.